Hey, listeners, I am so excited because today I have one of my great friends, Celanie Jones, on the podcast today. Celanie is truly a Jill of all trades and a mom of two, a Weston A. Price local chapter leader, and so much more beyond that. Celanie and I initially crossed paths in a different private community, which neither of us are a part of anymore. And I'm sure Celanie will talk a little bit about that later. And now Celanie is within my private community for Moms Off the Record, spreading her wisdom and maternal anecdotes. And today, in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the topic of sovereignty. What is sovereignty? This is a term, sort of like a buzzword, that is thrown around so much that it sort of has begun to lost its meaning, and people are using it incorrectly, or they're just using it because it's a cool marketing term sometimes. So Celanie, who uh, I know is truly sovereign in her life in so many facets, is going to walk us through her story. What brought her to this point of being sovereign in all aspects of life? How can you test for yourself to see if you are truly sovereign? And if you want to be more sovereign, what are the steps you can take to get there? So, hey, Celanie.
Hey, thank you for having me. Yes, as Catherine mentioned, we both knew each other from Free Birth Society, which is going through it right now. There's a bit of an unraveling of the cultural movement that it was trying to create, and people are beginning to realize that beneath the rhetoric of being in charge of yourself, and this is striking off on your own, that actually the emotional and spiritual and even intellectual aspects of sovereignty that they were trying to put forth kind of just weren't really what was really on offer. And instead, it was a really profitable business, a very fast growing, fast moving business where the rules of engagement were, I would say, the opposite of sovereign because there was a lot of dictating what people were allowed to do, say, and think. And that's kind of why, we decided to have this dialogue in public because we've been having it in private for like, I don't know, 6 months, close to a year now or something, as we
Yeah.
kind of participated in like the resistance or something. But Freebase Society started out, I think, in a very different place than where it has kind of ended up. And a lot of people have had very big stakes losses along the way in their personal lives and financially. Not a few people have lost a baby during their engagement with Free Birth Society. And I just think that like it really bears discussion. Like, what can we do to reform this part of ourselves that was maybe damaged or drawn in to this not very sovereign experience? And what does sovereignty really mean? Because you're right, it's thrown around everywhere on Instagram. Like if you go to like Crunchy Mom Instagram and Woo Woo Mom Instagram, which I'm proudly a part of now, um, like you will see that kind of thing everywhere. And it's like, you know, taupe desert neutrals and hats and feathers and like these certain fonts, and it's like this vibe, right? But real sovereignty is definitely really messy. And I would say that, I mean, like, look, to make the claim like, oh, I'm a sovereign person or whatever, it's an aspiration and ideal, and it's like a muscle that you build, and it's a rounds that you do in your life all the time, and it's like an immune system that you cultivate, and a biome that you cultivate in yourself,
Yes.
and it touches the different areas of your life. Um, to be these questions that you have to ask yourself, even when you really don't like the answers, and that's how you kind of know that you're really eliminating obstacles, I think.
So I have a question. I have two
Yeah,
questions for you.
please.
One, simply put, if you were just to explain it to a laywoman, what does it mean to actually be sovereign? And then two, um, why might someone want to actually be sovereign? Like, what's the
Yeah.
purpose?
So So what is it? Politically and personally, sovereign just means free of external control. That's the like most basic dictionary definition. For individuals, it kind of functions like an internal immune system in the different aspects of your life, right? So like physically, spiritually, emotionally, politically, culturally, it kind of means that you can't be manipulated because you can't be fooled as to what your own truth is in those areas of your life. Some people would say that this is like a natural state, but it's not an automatic state. It's kind of like, I think it's like kind of like how Buddhists think of enlightenment, like it's inside you, but it's something you kind of have to build. It's a potential and a something you have to meet in yourself. It's a higher self you have to meet, let's say. Um, the theory of it, I'd say, kind of presupposes that you are the one who's like most qualified to to have your best interest at heart, and that everybody in your life, whether it's like doctors or Emily Saldea, Mark Zuckerberg is like what I like to call her now, or or like, your mom, your concerned mom and your friends and doctors, anybody, midwives even, that these people kind of they work for you. They work for you, and you are the decider, and you're the one who's responsible because the back end of sovereignty is already automatically there, right? Like, you are gonna live the consequences of your choices. That there's no one else who can, like, live your life after you've made these decisions, right? So before you've made the decisions, you shouldn't let anyone else live your life for you then either. Um, anyway, okay, so the point of sovereignty is really, like, when you ask the question, "Who's truly in charge of your life?" The answer should be you. Um,
Mm,
so and, so it's an active questioning enough that you can spot obstacles to your own willingness and ability and whatever you're missing to be in charge. So we can easily from that definition, from that way of talking about it, right? We can easily see why Free Birth Society and Emily Saldea were doing an opposite thing, because they were really handing you really strict rules, a really strict story to follow. There were no extenuating circumstances, and there was actually like no customization of people's individual journeys. She didn't encourage people to like pick and choose anything. I mean, the choices were like exactly as they talk about political propaganda, like within a narrow band, you can have all the debate you want. Like that's how she kind of functioned, right? So
right.
there was nobody who like, maybe I really did need a C-section. She would never even really acknowledge that. She kind of acted like it didn't exist.
Yep.
Um, and anything of that nature, she kind of was just like, "Mm, it doesn't exist." Um, that's when you can know you're in the presence of propaganda, I think. Anyway,
Yeah.
so yeah, she didn't have any frameworks for that she would offer people. How would you know if you're truly sovereign? One of the things that I personally have dealt with a lot is like, you have to have integrated your past trauma. Integrating something is like letting your body respond and fully process and digest the experience that happened to you. The reason that psychedelics have gone wrong for people or have not created the cultural change that maybe they could, for example, is that people don't take the time to integrate. We don't have rites of passage anymore in our society. We have to kind of rebuild them and create them and recognize them in our own. And women are so lucky because we have like biological inborn ones that are transformative for us. Um,
Yeah.
and once you have like integrated, you might have, or you could should shoot for as a person, integrity, which means your thoughts match your words, match your actions. And that's a very uncomfortable reality actually for most people, because it means that you're going to get a lot of blowback for what you if you share the truth about your life, which I personally recommend, and yourself, which I recommend. You're going to get blowback from the people who care about you, because they are going to be kind of confused by like how you're not at all trying to please them with the truths that you choose for yourself. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. I
have
would
you ever
imagine that like women with people-pleasing tendencies have a very hard time accomplishing this.
Yes, I definitely think that is true. Definitely true. I had a favorite journalism professor many years ago who, he would always say, like, if you are living a life with of true integrity, you would not be ashamed, or like you would be able to cope with it if whatever you did yesterday was on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow. And
Mm,
if you wouldn't be able to cope with that, then maybe consider not doing that thing, because the truth has a way of getting out about everything, right? So
yeah.
anyway, I always thought that was really valuable. I took it seriously, and I like that idea. I wanted to share it.
I wanted to quickly go back to something you said. You said that we no longer have rites of passage anymore. Can you give some examples of rites of passage that we used to have, and what are the consequences of us bypassing these rites of passage?
Yeah, this is a whole giant subtopic that somebody else could probably do a large episode on better, and I would highly encourage you to find that person and I'll help you. But what I
Thank
can say
you.
about it is just that I emotionally really relate to that idea myself as a young woman, who's grown into motherhood and now older motherhood, and like as a mother to my own kids. Rites of passage are the transformative experiences that kind of like run the idea of change that's happening in your life, in terms of your life cycle, like through your body, and it changes you. It's a transformative experience. And women are so lucky because our like menarche and our childbirth experiences and our menopause,
Menopause.
and
Yeah.
yeah, that these are built-in rites of passage that physically mark the transitions that we feel from the different phases of our lives. But the whole point of sovereignty is to like be yourself here right now, to be present enough to make a decision from your true self. And so the presence aspect of rites of passage and the transitional the official transition where you're different after you're someone else after that. Like that's something that helps people navigate their lives. It helps them compartmentalize in like when you're an adult and you go through in menopause, it's like there's a healthy aspect of leaving the past behind and no longer trying to dwell in um youthful like, to stop wearing puff sleeves and maybe give up high heels and start, like, talking more loudly about what you really care about, you know?
Yes.
And ask yourself, like, with the years left you have in your career or whatever, in your mothering journey with your kids as they're getting older, like, what do you really care about? What do you really wanna do?
Mm,
So yeah, so those rites of passage, I think what can you do? You can kind of, you can invent ways to mark that for your kids, and you can research ones that your ancestors did maybe or that other people's ancestors did if you're really grasping, but I like to try to direct people toward their own ancestors. But, you know, though we usually in fact, Christians and Jews, and I guess there might be something like this in Islam too, or in other faiths, in Hinduism, I think there is, but there's a religious ceremony that marks the transition to adulthood. And
mhm.
it's generally considered to be about your moral adulthood and your, like, vision or wisdom of the adult truths. And, the hunting and gathering kinds of tribes have always done things that are generally about hunting for boys, and there's, like, your first hunt or your first it's usually, like, your first something that, like, brings you into adulthood. Those there's something like that in every culture. So,
Yes.
it's really cool to go and look at what your cultures, did, but anyway, so sorry, redirecting back to this little list of like, what can you do if you're sovereign? You're capable of laying down boundaries, of changing your mind. So that's one of the big ones that came into play with pre society.
Which I've done openly on this podcast. So when I saw that you included this on your list, I was like, "Yay, I can be sovereign."
Yes. Or
You
no,
know?
changing your mind is like one of the really big ones because it's your mind. It's your mind, you
Right.
know?
And because a lot of people prefer to double down on what they previously thought because the shame and embarrassment that comes from openly changing your mind is just too much to deal with.
Totally. Yeah. I think shame is a powerful tool, but it's almost never the right one.
Mm,
Like, it's just something that You shame is only something you should ever take into your own, like, advisement. You should never let anyone heap shame on you and therefore try to direct your course. That
yes.
doesn't work, you know?
Right. Hey, real quick, I want to remind you that my small group coaching program, No Nonsense Night Training, goes live on Monday, February 9th. I will be guiding a select few moms who are committed to getting their toddlers and older children out of overnight pull ups. And by the end of the program, you will have the tools for them to wake up dry consistently. I am sharing what I teach in my one on one client work as a potty training consultant, plus as a mom of two toddlers with first hand experience troubleshooting all sorts of night training issues. This program is ideal for you if your little one is at least 3 years old and you are not subscribing to the mainstream pediatric advice to just wait and see. We will meet once per week over Zoom for check ins and coaching in tandem with voice, text, and photo communication via the Voxer app as a group. Deep sleepers, co sleepers, and bedwetters are all welcome. You do not have to, and I'd argue you should not, wait and see whether your kid will start magically waking up dry if your child is at least 3 years old. Younger toddlers are welcome on a case by case basis, and I have helped many clients night train their little ones who are under 3 years old. There really is no one size fits all solution to night potty training, and it's dependent on a lot of factors. I know how beneficial it is to be in a supportive, private group with other moms walking the same path as you. If you have any questions about eligibility, don't hesitate to email or DM me. The first 15 women who join will receive a 1 month free trial to the private Moms Off the Record community. And if you're already in the community, don't worry, I have something special for you. You will instead receive a complimentary 30-minute potty training one on one with me. Don't wait until the night before to reserve your spot. Click the link in the show notes or head to the link in my Instagram bio to join. See you on the night. Okay, so back to your list.
Yeah, you should be capable of, um, and curious about digesting new information. So questioning some of your assumptions is like a pretty regular occurrence for people who are really trying to do this right. Your integrity is not for sale, not for approval, not for clicks or popularity, wealth, convenience, anything. When the world asks you to choose between anything that looks nice on the surface and your true self, you pick your true self. Like you just you can trust that. You can actually bank on that as a source of no regret in your life. To literally like ask yourself like, what do I really think? What do I really want? And if somebody is trying to tell you that this other thing is going to do that for you, you can just always trust yourself. You can learn to lean into it just like you can learn to lift bigger and bigger weights in a gym. Like you can lean
Yes.
into that, you know. Um you are prepared to take ownership of your successes and your failures. You're aware of your biases and you kind of own them. You're capable of spiritual exploration without fear. This is something I'll get into a little more later, but like um you don't let the idea of God become a reason that you yourself can't make any decisions or weigh anything yourself. God is a way to lift yourself into your higher self and love and accept yourself more and feel more and more capable, not to feel hemmed in by truths that you're encountering that you don't know what to do with and to just sort of ignore those and be like, "No, I'm on this narrow path." Like, I personally don't believe in that. There may be more religious people than I am who endorse that way of life, but I think that God is big enough to stand up to your truths in your life and
Hmm.
to actually help you with them, not try to dissuade you from what you're thinking and feeling. So if you ever come to a crossroads in your life, as I did, which I'll get into,
Yes.
where the ideas that people give you about God don't match what you're feeling inside, I think personally that you can connect with God better by going your inner route than you can by taking the detours that people present to you.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, and we covered the shame thing already. So yeah. So I guess I'm going to now maybe launch into a little bit of my own kind of weird little journey from childhood to adulthood, from a people pleaser and a kind of a weak person to somebody who knew that I could handle anything. And this kind of gets a little bit sad, depressing, graphic, challenging ideologically, probably. And so I guess I would urge anybody who's still listening that has kids in the background or whatever to like think about that. Um, so basically, okay, so I was raised in a pretty like strange and abusive family. And that made my ideas about kind of what kind of love that I would seek as a grown up pretty strange. I left my home early to go to college early because that was the only way that I could like I wanted to emancipate actually legally, if you know what that is, but like that didn't work
Yeah.
because my parents were threatening to pull my college money. And I saw how my older friends with debt were already struggling. And I was like, okay, I've lived through this for enough years. I'm going to like let it ride. So
And
instead I
what
went
year was this?
this was like 1998, 99. So I was turning 17 when I went to college and I studied directing at Carnegie Mellon. So I was gearing up to be a theater professional, mainly because that's actually what my parents picked for me because they had bizarre ideas about how to like actualize their creativity through me. But that's another story. So
Wow.
anyway, so while I was there though, and those people didn't really fit me. That was like cool, but it wasn't my bag. And I was at that time too traumatized to really engage with my education that way. But I was like doing fine. I always managed to like do fine, but like beneath the surface there was more, and I kind of started going to therapy for the first time, and I would go on to do on and off 22 years of therapy before I was felt okay having a family. That's like how bad my
Hmm.
childhood was. So anyway, so then while I was there, I discovered the school newspaper, and I discovered that those people were like idealists and truth tellers and really honest, and that like really stuck with me. So I became kind of one of those people. I went to journalism school, I became a newspaper journalist, and then I worked for like girls and women's empowerment nonprofits, which is kind of ironic, but you will often see that in people's lives. Like they will um, go for the parallel thing. Julia Cameron writes about this a lot in The Artist Way. Like you'll go through for the parallel thing of helping someone instead of helping yourself. You get into the
Yes.
empowered position, right? And so for 10 years, I kind of like dated guys that I tried to fix and they were fine, but it wasn't really going anywhere. I was a very responsible careerist. I was kind of doing at 20 and 25 what most people are doing at 30 and 35. And so finally at 30, I hit my Saturn return, which you might have heard. Have you ever heard about that?
I've been through mine at 28,
Yeah.
actually, when I was in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, don't
Oh
miss
man.
that.
I know. It's crazy. Like you things fall away in a really real way. So
Oh,
for anybody
yeah.
who doesn't know, astrologically, and a Saturn return is like when Saturn is in the same position that it was when you were born. And Saturn is the planetary deity or the planetary energy of responsibility and hard truths and kind of putting your nose to the grindstone, and practicality. So uh shit falls off the apple cart at that point, right? And for me, that was I was 30 and I kind of ran away to Tennessee to date this much younger bluegrasser who was always on tour. He was like bluegrass guitarist who was always on tour. And I quit my responsible advertising job. I was doing like graphic design on this children's magazine and living in a tiny cabin, in a tiny moldy cabin in rural Tennessee surrounded on three sides
Moldy.
by cows. And I was like, really? really poor because I had quit the job I didn't like to do the little job that I did like. And so I kind of was exploring like what would my life look like if I did not care what anybody thought of me for the first time ever at 30 years old. It's crazy. So I had some
And
personal
liberating.
growth. Well, it was liberating. It was liberating. It was a little scary, but I had faith, I guess you could say. And so then I like was kind of lined up to do a really quick little leap of personal growth in the next few years very quickly, and it turned out to be kind of crazy and painful. So the guy that I was dating there, he was awesome, but it wasn't going anywhere. But I started talking to this other guy online, and that guy very quickly identified that I was somebody who would provide him with a lot of things that he wanted, and he turned out to be a really crazy predatory guy. I told him about this family parcel of land that I wanted to live on and that I wanted to like homestead and do all this crunchy stuff, right? And he was like, "Oh, this girl has land. Maybe I'll marry her." And so he like quickly made moves to essentially do that. And at the time, my brother was marrying somebody really successful. My parents, who I'm still barely in contact with, but they were kind of treating me really badly and making me feel really unstable and bad in a way that I already kind of felt. So I was like susceptible to this very manipulative cult leader man, right? And we got into a serious relationship very quickly. And then he was like, he had a corporate management job that he was actually he was in charge of a FedEx facility, and all the employees there actually had petitioned to have him removed for like cruelty and temper, and I didn't know that until later, and he had a child with a woman in New York that he actually had, like, just randomly abandoned. Like, so
Mm,
things all kind of came out as the time went on, but so he and I, at that point, were, like, engaged, and he told me that he didn't ever wanna have, like, a real job again. So I was like, "That's not gonna work because I wanna be a mom." And at that
yeah.
point, and at the time, he was, like, trying to find out if I was just gonna inherit this land or if he would have to pay my relatives for it. I still am having trouble getting my hands on it. It's a whole complicated family situation, but he found out that wasn't gonna be easy, and he found out that I expected him to work. And that was when our relationship blew up, and he, like, physically attacked me. He tried to strangle me. He, like, took this steel frying pan and, like, beat it into the shape of a pasta shell on my back stoop.
Terrifying.
It was crazy. So you can see how ironic that this, like, women's empowerment worker who's helping women escape abusive relationships is, like,
Right.
herself escaping an abusive relationship, which is what I then did. And, like, I had to go to night court, it was like, 'cause it was, like, right away, you had to do this, get a restraining order and, like, go to court. He spent several weeks in jail. He eventually got, like, a black mark on his work history as a result of this incident that meant he moved to Denver on to the next crazy woman. And I should mention too that part of my relationship with him for the year or so that I was with him was, like, he was really ideologically devoted to the idea of polyamory as this, like, spiritual growth path.
Ugh,
And he also,
no.
was a practitioner of BDSM, which is, like, acting out what I now look at as acting out the worst holes in your nurturant years and the worst trauma done to you by your nurturers, acting that out in your love life later. So, those 2 things kind of became a part of my life, on the periphery, and I was more an observer, I would say, than a diving in kind of a person to these experiences, but I experienced it just enough to realize that these things were chemically addictive to a traumatized brain. And
The
part of
polyamory and the BDSM, that's what
Yes,
you mean?
because they light up your brain with, like, dopamine. Okay, do you know how a child, especially ADHD kids, but it's said that they sometimes are looking for negative dopamine, where they will seek negative response from you. Every old-fashioned parent even has heard that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it kinda does that on an adult scale. You're seeking and you're getting a really crazy, painful, negative attention, and you're challenging yourself to let go of a person that you wanna be attached to, and those 2 things, like, many people are in both of those communities.
Mhm.
A community the same way that Freeway Society was a community,
Right.
only, but so, like, it really tweaks your brain, and it's something that you can both of these things are something you can easily become addicted to. Um, but part of the journey that I would go on after that was actually to do trauma therapy in such a way that those things kind of fell away. Like, I was no longer like, my, like, supposed kink for this, like, violent sexual practices went away when I healed my trauma using somatic trauma healing. And that's
Mm,
something that I plan to kind of teach on in the future because I do think a lot of women kind of are really confused about that, and they are discussing polarity with their partners, and they
right.
take that, like, people like Kim and Ami take that into a weird place where that becomes a source of, like, thrill that they're like, "This will spice up my marriage. This will make my relationship better." and they don't realize that actually what they're doing is contacting childhood trauma, and they're, like,
Interesting.
drilling into it to, like, juice it like oil. Yeah. So, if you are someone who has participated in that stuff, what you really need is somatic trauma therapy, like EMDR or things of that nature. Anyway, I digress.
No,
So
that is interesting. I once dated someone about 15 years ago who was a little
wow.
bit older than me, who I have absolutely no experience or knowledge about like BDSM other than like, I know in the show Billions, like the therapist in that show was into BDSM. So that's like
Yeah.
the extent of it that I understand. In terms of the polyamory, like
Mhm.
my first exposure to that was when an ex wanted to open up the relationship, and I just felt completely gaslit, blindsided, confused, and hurt. And I don't think it's natural. But I know that their argument is like, well, monogamy isn't natural. So, yeah, I just don't see it being healthy for any relationship. And for me, it's like a huge red flag. So I think it's great that in the future you're going to be offering coaching around this. I think your story in particular, though, so we talked about the extreme abuse that you were that you had in this relationship, and but I think your story after that, from what you recently told me, off this recording, was fascinating in terms of how that led you to being more sovereign. Can you divulge some details there?
Yeah, okay, so as of the court date and this crazy violent explosion, because I wasn't gonna stay in a physically abusive relationship, but often the emotional stuff is harder to parse when you're in the middle of it, right? So,
Yes.
as of this violent incident, our relationship was over, but, because life is crazy, at that point, I was already pregnant, actually, because we had been engaged, and this was, like, an evolving life situation where I think I was also in denial about so much of this and trying to, like, weirdly hang on to him at that point. And it's sad to think that somebody at the age of, I think I was then 32, would do this. But abuse in your childhood is it's like it's a long road to unravel, man. I mean, I'll tell you what, it like really, even working as hard as you can for years, like you really changing patterns is very difficult. Even once you kind of see them, you have to see them all the way down to their root, and you have to have the strength to act on it. And you often have to like uproot things in your life to do so. So I was at the point where I was like pregnant by someone who I had a restraining order against. If that doesn't sound super trashy, like, it's very painful and awful, but at the time, I was, like, running on adrenaline and just trying to survive. I didn't
Yeah.
hardly feel any of this because I was literally making nervous system decisions, and I'm just so grateful that our human neurology is built to do that in dangerous situations because that's kind of what got me out of it, you know?
Yes.
So I was pregnant, and I was, like, at that point, maybe 8 weeks pregnant, and I was, like, thinking about whether I should have this baby or not, because I considered and I spoke with a couple of friends who had had abortions kind of for life reasons, generic life reasons. And I asked them about it and I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, I'm in my early 30s and I think I should just have this baby because I'm healthy now. I'm employed now. I don't I think I could potentially maybe lean on my family a little bit. They have enough money to maybe tangentially engage with them and I could potentially kind of cobble it together and work a little bit and survive this way and maybe team up with other single moms, right? So I decided because my own mother had done this too, actually, at the same age. She and I have the same birthday, and we have like a really weird karmic link that has been a challenge throughout my life. And now I look at it differently than I did. But then I thought, I'm going to redo her life paths right this time. So I'm going to do this. So
Yeah.
I weighed the idea of having an early abortion, and that felt like a slightly lighter choice by comparison to what would come later. But so I decided not to do it. I decided to go ahead with it. I bought this like little house that needed lots of work at a cheap auction. I told my employer, I told my family and friends I was ready to have this baby, but I had started in the medical system, even though I was already friends with this home birth midwife and I would have said that I wanted to do that. I started going to prenatal appointments through this little regular medical clinic because that's how you get your paperwork to go on food stamps and all that kind of stuff
Wow.
and Medicaid. So I started there and immediately it became obvious that things were not really quite right. I started to get strange blood work and strange test results, and I continued going to the appointments and getting more tests, and it was always this, like, narrowing window of what was wrong with me and what was wrong with this baby, and, mm, it took a number of successive rounds of tests to figure it out, and, So what most people don't know is that I think that's kinda how they figured out the term limits for abortions in states that allow you more time before you have the abortion, is that it actually takes a lot of time in some genetics cases to figure out what's going on.
Mm.
So finally, after a full DNA workup, they knew, that he had this chromosomal deletion condition, and by then, I only had a couple days actually to research it and make up my mind before I would have had to go to another state to end the pregnancy. Um, which it already felt like a horrible thing to have to do, of course. For me, my intuitive grasp on the morality of this situation or the ethics of it was that it gets worse the farther you go. Because weighing doing it at 8 weeks felt like it was sort of a shame, but that wasn't why I chose to go forward. I chose to go forward because I felt like it was time in my life to ask more of myself in that way, and somehow, even though I didn't really completely feel emotionally ready, I was, like, gonna try to just do it because I felt like it was the right thing to do. I wasn't terrified of abortion or adamantly against it. I would have felt that it was a shame at that point, but I did it because I wanted to, not because I didn't not want to, if that makes sense. But, you
The
know.
reasons behind it, I think, are important for our listeners to hear. And I am aware that our listener base is largely,
Yeah.
there's a lot of religious listeners out there, a lot of them who are no abortion, no matter what. I really do hear a lot of sides of the spectrum, except for the side that's like you and I talked about this yesterday because we were on the phone, I was walking, and you were sharing the story with me yesterday. Um, and you asked me, like, "Is it alright if I share this?" And I said, "Absolutely," because I don't censor. We have a free speech policy on the podcast, and this moment is a pivotal part of your story as to what led you to become sovereign. But then you and we started to discuss the nuances of, like, well, what are your current stances on abortion?
Yeah.
And I think it'll be important to give some context there. Like, we talked about how crass it is, when we see the extremist other side just treating abortion like it's, getting your nails done, right? And
Yeah.
like,
Making jokes and celebrating it and saying, "Oh, I don't know how many abortion." Like, there was actually a celebrity recently, I forget who, but she's like, "I don't know how many, I couldn't tell you how many." I was like, "Are you kidding?" Like,
yeah,
what does that mean? What does that mean? Because actually even neurologically, and I'm sure this intensifies with time too, that, like, the act of going into the place that your body perceives as the most safe in your body, the place where your nervous system is, like, the very root of it, and, like, you know, destroying something there that your body on every level and your mind and your soul can only be programmed to love despite what your life circumstances might be, that's inevitably a very neurologically traumatizing experience. So, I finally found out what this genetic condition was. It's a chromosomal deletion condition that they're not really able to predict the severity of the side effects of. And so there's a foundation for this genetic disease, and they kind of paint a rosy picture, but I kind of wanted to, like, drill deeper. So I called really quick the world expert on this condition, who's located at Yale in Connecticut, I think, or New Haven, whatever. I don't know.
New
At Yale.
Haven, yeah.
Called him at home on Saturday. He was actually really mad, which I thought was pretty callous of him, but he was appalled that I was considering aborting a baby with this condition. I said, "Yeah, but what are these people's lives like?" And he just kind of was like, "Well, and so, but then I just, like, asked him some details. He wasn't really very forthcoming, but, he gave me some perspective, and I also found one local doctor who had one patient that had this condition, who painted the picture of a very sad young boy who, like, couldn't really wear normal clothes. Part of the condition is really dysfunctional skin. So he couldn't wear normal clothes, he didn't have a normal social life, he kind of couldn't do any activities, he was very depressed, and his parents were, as he was entering his teenage years, his parents were very concerned about his mental health. And then I kind of started to read mom blogs about this condition too, and I found one woman in, I think it was Australia, who had, like, twins who had this condition, and they had many of the more extreme side effects, so they would never reach chemical puberty. They would never reach adult height. They had severe cognitive issues. They had flesh growths in their eyes. Like, it was really obscure and a very long and strange list of conditions. And you can even, because of the physical way that these deletions work on the chromosome, you can even have unanticipated side effects that are, like, adjacent to these, and adjacent deletions would make it even weirder and even worse. So, God bless this woman for the incredible job she was doing with her twin boys that had this condition. They spent a lot of time outside doing kind of sort of they lived by the seashore, and they kinda did activities like that, and it made me realize, and also, I should say too, I was raised with a disabled family member who was my same age, who lived in my room for part of my adolescence, and she had a genetic disease too. It was a different one. But all of these experiences, led me to believe that it wasn't really clear cut that I should go ahead with this, that actually it sounded like a pretty terrible idea. And then, um, you know, I like kind of thought about the child's life, right? And I would be like, okay, I would have to either work and hand my child to strangers or align myself with my abusive parents just to like live off of their money in some way. I would have to, he would have a father that is basically criminally insane and a horrible person who could come back into his life at any point. And,
Mm,
and he would have a body that totally didn't work and kind of maybe a mind that didn't completely work too. And I should also say that by this time, in the final month of time as I waited for these final test results, I was in and out of the hospital 4 times because I myself was getting sicker and sicker. My body looked really weird. I was like purple and green and my pallor was crazy.
wow.
And I was like getting every virus that came by. Like I was like really, really sick, like very sick. It was clear to me on some level that like nature didn't really want this despite trying to hang on to it and my wishing that it would be anything other than what it was. I felt like regardless of what anybody might say about what God, quote unquote, any conventional notion of God was doing in this situation, I felt like it was clear to me that a God that I align with more was like, no, no. So this experience led me to have to over several weeks, but at the end, very deeply and very quickly, really honestly contact my idea of what God is and like what God expects of me or who God is to me or if God is inside me, like how God guides our lives, what God is. And I came to the conclusion that I would trust myself because I was the only one who brought up abortion. None of the medical professionals even suggested it to me. They assumed that I was going to try to ride it out and that I was going to like do the rest of my pregnancy in and out of the hospital unable to, like, work or stand or do anything. Like, they thought I was just gonna roll with it, I guess, or they didn't wanna say it. I think they didn't wanna say it because of the cultural baggage surrounding that in this situation, they didn't wanna say it, and so I had to say it. Um, and yeah, so I very quickly scheduled this abortion at week almost 24, and I just, like, kind of emotionally made my peace with it, and I tried to, like, speak to my child inside me. I tried to speak to my son and, tell him that, like, that I thought that I was doing what was best for him and that his spirit would have another place to go and another thing to do and to thank him for being with me for this short time. And I just was like, I want you to try not to be afraid. Don't worry, because I kind of asked them about whether the procedure would include, anesthesia or consciousness altering for him. Um, anyway, so I went forward with it. And I put my hands on my belly and let them anesthetize me, and when I woke up, he was gone, and my belly was flat and my body was like, back to normal, quote unquote. But of course, these kinds of things, like I would never really be normal again, right? Because this is a very deep trauma experience. So I was
Yes.
over the next week or two, I kind of was plunged into, increasing, I guess you would call it hypomania, but it was like a mild form of postpartum psychosis. I was still going to work because my bosses at this women's nonprofit completely did not give a shit about my well-being at all, and were not treating it like somebody that I had just had to kill someone that I loved and had a horrible major surgery of neurological damage at the same time. They weren't acting like that. They were acting like I had, like, had a dentist's appointment or something.
So sad and
So
detached.
well, yeah, and I'm sure that it made my, um, the PTSD and the strange wavy gravy psychological state that I was in much worse. So I was going to work, but I couldn't really drive because I couldn't remember what street led to what street. I was very just like confused and I felt like this strange energy crawling up my spine. It was a really, really difficult time. And I was that way for about 6 weeks. I was starting to have strange thoughts and, believe crazy things about like knowing things in the universe that no one else could know. And like, it was just getting really weird. Okay. And, so I managed but luckily though, because as a younger person, I had some experience with psychedelics, I recognized what was happening to me, and I was
Yeah.
able to detach my kinda will from my mind and go, "This is crazy. I need to, like, tell people about it and seek help and kind of just, like, hold on," right? So I managed to get an appointment with a specialist that specializes in, like, postpartum, psychosis and things like that, But it took so long to get into the office of this person that by then I actually was better because
Is that
thank
interesting?
thank goodness, about 6 weeks after this experience, my period returned, and when it did, it was like a sudden moment to moment return of my sanity. It was like a gong was rung inside my body, and it was like a reverberation of sound, and, like, my blood came, and I was, like, mentally healed, which is
You know what's
really crazy.
interesting?
It
For
happened the
many
instant.
for many women, it just seems like it's the opposite story, like, "Oh, my period comes, and now I become this crazy version of myself." For you, it brought you back down to sanity. What do you think the meaning of that is?
I think that that is, yeah, that's a good observation. I never thought of. I think it is, typically like that where, like, after you are spinning at this high velocity and doing this other crazy thing, pregnancy, if it's abruptly interrupted, which no one really wants, but if that happens, your blood is like it washing it clean and hormonally returning you to your normal wavelength, and, I think it's designed to do that. I think it's like a the rotation is like momentum for your hormones, momentum for your cycle to, like, pull you back into this centripetal force of, like, where you're supposed to be. And so I'm just I was a moment where I just the amount of gratitude that I felt to know that I wasn't gonna be insane for the rest of my life was I can't overstate how grateful I was for nature and for the gift of that blood. I was so happy. Anyway,
Yes.
so and then I went to the doctor's appointment, and they told me that I could go on medication forever, or I could just wait and
Great.
see. And I was like, I think I'm fine. Like, and I asked myself, like, my body, like, is this gonna come back? Am I gonna like loop de loo later? No, I think I'm fine. And so I walked out of their office without any prescriptions or further appointments.
And
Yeah,
since then, you've had 2 children who are now, what,
that's right.
4 and 6?
Yep, 4 and 6. Yeah.
4 and 6, and you have not had any postpartum psychosis after their births, is that right?
No, although I would say with my first birth, so okay, so the to redux the short version of that, I healed, I did a lot of EMDR. I did EMDR for 5 years. I was very traumatized, but I continued with my life, and eventually I managed to get to the point where I wanted to date again. I approached that very businesslike and bloodless. I was like, "Listen, I am not gonna have sex with you, and I'm not gonna be exclusive with you, and I'm not gonna have any emotional attachment to you until I'm sure that you are a stable person who has my values and where we can, like, make something out of this together." And I
Ugh,
even told
yeah.
everybody that, but very quickly I met my husband, and he was awesome, and I couldn't deny it, and so 7 years later, here we are, and we have these 2 healthy kids, thank God. But, so when I had
Yes.
my first birth, with Torsten, I had him at home with a very hands-off midwife, and it was pretty short, it was like 6 hours total, so it was pretty short for a first labor, but it was very intense, and I demanded complete silence, and I felt like it blew a lot of trauma out of my body, like, it was like a flesh like, uh, the book, Stalking Wild SOAS describes this kind of thing really well, but basically, your trauma when you don't address your physical trauma that kinda lives in your pelvis and in your fascia before you do something major like have a baby, your trauma is like a flesh wall that you have to drill through and break open in order to get this baby out. So I think that's what people mean when they talk about how you should deal with your trauma before you try to have a baby is that like you'll encounter it in your birth, not just like as the ghosts of your past or something, but as a physical wire of flesh that you're like fighting to get through to get your baby earthside. So that's kind of what happened to me. It was really intense. I had to kind of like fight for the end of the birth and like just I wanted it to be over maybe a little earlier than it really wanted to be over, so I ended up tearing, but I, like, got him out, and the euphoria was incredible. At first, actually this is interesting, I don't know if I ever told you this, but for the first, like, 12 hours, maybe 24, I didn't really, like wasn't able to contact feelings of love for my baby because I had no oxytocin rush. I actually somehow, like, you know, went without it in some kinda way and pushed him out. And I didn't feel love, and I asked my midwife, I was like, "What if I never love him? Can I still be a good mother if I'm never able to love this child?" Because chemically where I was at that moment was like, I don't know if I can feel if I can allow myself to love. Like, that's it was a whole journey, Catherine, it was a whole journey. But
Wow.
so
And
I was
she's
like,
like, "You're only 12 hours in. You gotta give it at least a day."
"You know what? It's really weird." I to this day, I don't know what to think of this, but she didn't say that. What she said was, she said, she started crying along with me, and she said yes, that happens to some people, but yes, you absolutely can be a good mother anyway. It might be very tough and it's a long road, but yes, you can be a good mother anyway. 'Cause, I mean, she wisely probably knew that, like, it was possible that, she wouldn't get a lot of time with me in the future, and what if I was on that path? She wanted to give me something I could use that was support for the long haul if I really was gonna be forgive me, I'm really my face is so red, I didn't know that I would be
N
crying on this podcast.
no, no, it's yeah, it's
But
so moving.
so she told me that, and I was like, "Wow, actually, that's a really badass way to handle that situation, to tell the truth." You know?
Yeah.
It's a gift
Scary.
of honesty, scary honesty, yeah. And
Yeah.
I admired it, and honestly, that gift of scary honesty goes into the file too of things that make you sovereign.
Mm.
'Cause but then, I went to sleep, like, I was able to catch just, like, a couple hours of sleep that night, and that was what did it. Sleep is another really powerful neurological reset and chemical reset. So when I woke up, then I was in, like, cosmic bliss for probably 6 to 8 weeks after that. It was really great.
Love
So
that.
miracles do happen, yeah. Anyway,
Yes,
and the
yes.
second birth was so lightning fast. It was 45 minutes in my bathroom, and that was actually why I had a free birth is kind of because it was gonna be so fast, and my midwife, quit on me with my daughter. My midwife quit on me at 38 weeks, mostly for things that I had screamed her for in the beginning, still saying she was gonna do those crazy things to me, and I was like, "Hey, listen, I don't submit to that. I don't consent to that."
Like what? What
Um
are the crazy things? Give
like,
us
she's
an
like, "Oh, I might
example.
have to burst your bag of waters, and I might have to do a pelvic exam or 2, just say blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "No, I told you before I ever saw your face on the phone, I told you that I was looking for a midwife who understood the idea of not doing those things, because I don't think they have any purpose, and in my situation, like, I mean, if I have to have my, um, amniotic sac ruptured, I'm probably at the hospital at that point. I don't want some
Yeah.
lady with a with a braid
Like why?
and a crochet hook, like, I'm sorry, I don't know. Maybe that's a class way to talk about that. Maybe there are home birth midwives who are totally qualified to do that and who would do it in an appropriate way. But my gut about this woman in this situation said no. So I was like, "Listen," and I said, like, "Can you come over and talk about this with me?" People think I'm such a, like, hard driving, aggressive person, but, like, I didn't, like, read her the
You're
riot
a
act at
teddy bear
all.
inside. It's just that you're
All cancers are
so
that way.
sure of yourself, you're so articulate and clear in what you want and your boundaries that that can be scary to people who are people pleasers and not used to that, but it's really not scary. I think it's a privilege, you know? I think it's a gift.
Thank you, my friend. I try to give it as a gift. That is why I do it, I think, or at least that's what I tell myself, but I try every day
Yeah.
to make my honesty a gift to people. But anyway, I just said to her, "Will you come and talk to me about this? Like, can we just have a real conversation, like, person to person on my couch? Like, talk to me." And she just said, "I don't think I can serve you the way you wanna be served," and she peaced out. Luckily, she didn't catch any of our checks, but, like, come on now. So anyway, 38 weeks, and I was like, "All right, now we're really gonna test whether my certainty in my body that I feel that this is gonna be a fast, easy labor is true." And luckily, it was. Luckily, my husband is very coordinated and was good at baseball, so he caught her. He, like, jokes that, like, his dad coaching him baseball is, like, how he caught her. He's like, "Thank God, 2 hands, like, I did it." So he caught her, and, we had this a very quick, easy birth, but then my placenta kind of lingered. It was not attached, but I was so reluctant to pull it out because by then I had been kind of exposed to the Free Birth Society thing, and also I had friends in the natural birth community, and we talked about this, but I don't think I understood the distinction between when your placenta is attached and when it's not, because once it's detached, you should get it out, and I didn't
I don't
wanna
know
pull
if
it
I
out.
told you, but I had the exact same thing, so I
No,
knew
you didn't. We have so
and
many parallel
yeah,
things. It's so funny.
now I know, right? Now I know the difference between it still being attached to the cervical wall
Yeah.
versus not the cervical wall,
The
the
uterine wall, yeah.
yeah, uterine wall. Oh my gosh. Don't mind my mom brain versus being detached from the wall, but still lingering. So mine was detached for many hours.
Wow.
Fortunately, nothing bad happened, but then we were able to get it out. And yeah, same as you, there was some concerns about that, but I kind of just assumed, like even my friends who have had unmedicated, no intervention hospital births, there and no pitocin, by the way, in the third stage, their placentas were just kind of sliding out easily within an hour.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out, like, I was like, huh, is it because I had a C-section with my first birth? Or was there just too much like mental fear? But I had the same thing. So it was detached. I wasn't hemorrhaging. And I knew there wasn't an issue because I wasn't turning white. Like my lips looked good. My face looked good. I was totally coherent. I'm just like, why can't I get this thing out? It is common. So you had that too. I didn't realize.
I did. How many hours? Mine were 2 hours. How many hours were yours?
Oh,
I'm curious, like
I'm almost afraid to say, but 9.
wow. So you weren't bleeding a lot? You think it was
No.
detached, but you weren't bleeding a lot. That's so interesting.
So here's what happened. The reason I know now, because I spoke to a midwife about it. The reason I know it was detached and not, if it wasn't detached and it was still connected for 9 hours, that would be a whole other problem. I would have already been at the hospital, right? But I wasn't fading. I wasn't going in and out of consciousness. I felt great. I was just like, get this thing out. There was a gush of blood, like that initial gush of blood that happens early on after the birth. That is typically the sign that the placenta has detached. I had that.
Mm,
But
okay.
then after that gush of blood happened, I was pulling on it, getting in all different positions. It wasn't coming out. Ultimately, I mean, I don't want to give specific advice like on this episode of how to get it out, but like there are traditional midwives who know the manual technique for
Mhm.
getting it out. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're in that situation, it's a lot different than somebody saying they're gonna, like, do that to you preemptively and telling you, "Well, I might have to do this," like, as if she, like, she was phrasing it as if I wouldn't even be the one to make that decision, so
Right.
that weirded me out a lot. But
Yes.
anyway, so yeah, mine was it was 2 hours, but I was bleeding a lot, and I felt great until I didn't, and my head started to ring, and finally I was like, "Okay, it's time, like, we need to get this thing out or else I'm gonna have to go in the next, like, 20 minutes." We live 5 minutes from a hospital, which is why I also felt like we live in a city, and in both neighborhoods, we live pretty close to a decent hospital, and we live, less than 20 minutes from, like, a really renowned regional women's hospital that does everything.
Yeah.
So I felt really okay with that being a possibility, if it was necessary. But anyway, so I was gonna think about that, and then, the friend who arrived after the baby emerged, who was gonna help me, she was like a doula who had some midwifery training, but, like, she wasn't, she was like a helper more than a thing. So she was like, "Okay." She put on gloves and she, like, yanked it out. She's like, "Okay, now push, yank it out." And she did, and within moments, I felt much better, and I knew that everything was fine. Thank goodness. It was,
Yes.
and so, yeah, so then after that, I joined Free Birth Society and I became, a really active member talking about everything but birth usually, but just trying to help people gain the confidence that I kind of now felt about natural mothering because I had a toddler, I had a baby, and I was feeling really super overwhelmed with 2 kids, but otherwise like confident in the path I had chosen. And I was
Yes.
just noticing how much the weaving of women's lives together and talking to each other can empower us to feel like we have the potential to be sovereign because uh that's just like the core ingredient for success of any natural lifestyle choice is other mothers. And so yeah, so I came there meeting a few really experienced people who were giving cool feedback and cool advice and living from their yurts and doing all their cool stuff. And then I realized that actually there was a need for like a voice of somebody with a mature level of confidence to say you can do this, and so I kind of tried to be that person, and for about 2 years I was, and, then things got really weird in that community. They had always been a bit sketchy, but the censorship advanced and advanced until finally I was booted for saying something about how you shouldn't charge people for their own material in the same way that she was doing. But anyway, in the time I was there, I did not recall many deaths, but it was a climate of, I mean, dare I say, like, secrecy and very strange censorship, and reporting other people was something she asked people to do. I really don't think anybody did that, but it became a very, very weird environment, and, so I got to witness a lot of rhetoric about sovereignty, at the same time that people were operating almost as if they would inside like a communist bloc or some kind of war zone. Like it was really very, very strange. And I began to notice like, wow, this is not sovereignty. But I think I made allowances in the beginning for Emily's personality and her decisions because I was like seeing a lot of the same rough personality traits that I have struggled with myself in her. And I was like, wow, she's really brash and takes no prisoners. And has trouble with, like, interrupting people and stuff like that. I've struggled with all that stuff, but this woman somehow managed to make a multi-million dollar business out of that, and I haven't done that yet. So let's stick around and see how she did it.
So funny.
Unfortunately, well, I mean, that's what I didn't really know at the beginning what I was getting into, but
Totally.
it turns out that how she did it was, I guess she lied a lot and kind of bullied people a lot and did a lot of crazy things. And that's still all coming out in the wash.
Yeah.
And I encourage any listener who has heard of Free Birth Society but has not been on the Reddit or kind of read the Guardian articles, listened to the Guardian podcast to do so because there's a lot of valuable information in there. And it's actually really part and parcel of this discussion too, exploring the idea of sovereignty because The word sovereignty was applied to everything inside free birth society, and yet there was a dictatorial agenda that was anything but sovereign.
Yeah, the total irony, right?
Yes, exactly. It is very ironic. So the other part of what I kind of wanted to share was a little bit of a breakdown of like what are the what are the parts of your life you can look at and ask, am I sovereign? And what are some ways to identify
Yeah.
those qualities? In its simplest form, sovereignty is true presence, the ability to just be yourself here now and to make a decision from really being and owning yourself and really being present to your reality, not letting any mediation of anyone's agenda stand between you and what it is that you're facing, and to take advantage at the same time of all the perspectives and as many inputs as you can use, right? But to like not let any of them pressure you or control your own your decisions. And in order to do that, I think you can kind of break it down into a couple of parts of a person or a person's life. So let's start with physical. Physical autonomy, physical sovereignty is that you realize that you're the one really in charge of all of this, all of the physical manifestations in your life, your choice to go to a doctor, the way that you birth, the way that you do your dental hygiene, what you eat. You're really the one who has to live with the consequences of that stuff. And so all the resources that you can consume, all the people you could interact with, they all work for you. Your friends and your family, and this is useful in emotional situations too, when your family or friends are trying to like push you toward or away from something. You have to look at these things as like, this person works for me. Emily Saldea works for you. You don't work for her, she works for you. And so you have to evaluate what she's offering you, what any of these people are offering you, as a tool you can use to make your own decision and to to access the information you need. That's actually part of it too. In physical, some of the obstacles that naturally crop up in this situation would be like, how hard is it to get real informed consent, particularly if you're like trying to birth in a hospital or something like that. But really, with anything, how hard is it to really get the information you need to be capable of making the decision yourself? And that's something where you should never consume only one source. This goes with intellectual sovereignty too, but you should never consume only one source of information. There are lots of other people who have written awesome books about free birth, and free birth really isn't for everyone. But as a side note, I'm going to interject just my own little hot take about free birth that I think maybe people
Yeah.
haven't heard, which is that I don't know why nobody's saying this, but like I think everybody should be prepared for the idea of a free birth happening to them, just like they should be prepared for the idea of an emergency C-section being how their birth ends.
That's so
Because
wise.
well, it's like, not everybody knows that they're gonna have this hour-long birth. Not everybody can tell where they are in the process, especially the first time, and, like, you could have a car baby. You could be, wake up suddenly in from contractions, just be like, "I can't go anywhere." Like, if we were able to accept that, and if even the medical establishment was able to say that honestly, that, like, "You this could happen to you," then we'd really have to acknowledge that birth is a lot more inherently safe than the mainstream sources want you to think, because your body might just do it, and that's okay, and you should be able, hopefully, intellectually, emotionally, to process that and just be able to make decisions based on that. If that's happening to you, it should not m make you think you're gonna die. It should
You know what
make
it
you
reminds me
you
of?
know
Is like when you're starting solids with your baby. And like this is a very new thing, and moms are worried about like, is it choking? Is it gagging? Right?
Yeah,
You should be prepared, not to scare anyone, but like you should be prepared for the possibility of like, yeah, you might need to do CPR. Like you might not have time
yeah,
to call EMS. And so we think about that. Moms are prepared, like, oh, I might have to do CPR on my baby, right? But like you're not going to be prepared in case you accidentally have a free birth. I just want to say, I would love to have that problem of an accidental free birth, like a car birth. My labors are like 1 to 3 days long. It's me just looking at the clock, wondering, like, when will I go to the next
wow.
phase?
Yeah.
I have no idea what it's like to a 45-minute birth. I mean, my active
It was a
labor
lot.
with Lucy was like 16 hours. And
Yeah.
you're saying your whole birth was 45 minutes.
It was.
It's fascinating. Yeah, so physical sovereignty, I wanna throw another example at you, see what you think. So if a woman says like, "Well, I'm sovereign because I'm choosing. I read all the informed consent. I'm choosing to go on the hormonal birth control pill or to get my tubes tied. So therefore I'm sovereign. No one told me to do it. I don't feel pressured. I'm choosing it." Is that physical sovereignty, or is the physical sovereignty saying like, "Yeah, I understand that those choices are an option for me, but I'm gonna choose to do, like, the fertility awareness method instead."
Mhm. Or the same with an elective C-section, for people who have feelings about that, they're just their feelings, like, yeah, okay, so here's what I'd say to that. So I would name several categories of sovereignty, and they all kind of weave together like a basket, and you kind of can't have one completely functional without the others. So physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, political, and cultural are the ones that I kind of came up with, and I would say that most people who think they're choosing those medicalized things that you just described out of, um out of physical sovereignty or out of intellectual sovereignty, they haven't really gone all the way around it intellectually, probably by taking sources that are, like, not what they originally conceived of, and then they also culturally are not really exposed to enough alternative culture to have access to those things or to be comfortable on levels that they're not acknowledging that are emotional about, like, what is your body supposed to do? Are you around anybody who's telling you that anything is safe besides being in a hospital for any of the things that you've just named? Like, if you could have access to all of that and have a wider lens, would you then still pick the, hard medical stuff that you didn't necessarily physically need? I would say that many people I mean, okay, I think that mainstream culture guides people toward that stuff so hard, and most people never do the work to really not care, and that is where they're starting from. So is that completely sovereign? No, I don't think it is. I think culturally you have to have lost the sense that you care what other people think of your life, and intellectually you have to really challenge yourself with opposing sources about all kinds of things. And I think, politically you have to take down your walls about people who are different from you. And here's what I would say about political sovereignty. It's that we can all keep our sanity in these very divided times by realizing that ordinary people, your neighbors and friends and other people in your world, are never the problem. They might be part of the stuff that you don't like coming at you in your life, but they're never where the stuff started. There's always going to be like powers that be that decided
The
that these
puppet
people,
masters.
yes. And so the most you should do is maybe try to stay away from or feel sorry for people that you really feel are a threat to your well being. Like, for example, I, yesterday I was investigating this, like, extracurricular little engineering activity for my 6-year-old, and I sat down with the lady on the phone and I was like, "Okay, now I'm gonna ask you a question that's kind of politically charged. Are there any trans teachers or staff in your facility?" And she said, "Well, let me think about that. Oh, I guess we have one." And I said, "Okay,
Mm,
are any of those people involved with the programs that we're talking about sending my son to?" "No." "Okay." So, uh, ye like, and that's not because I have any hatred or wish to violence for any trans people. It's because I think that the trans agenda is cultural programming that is not true and comes from a place of intellectual machinations that aren't really using words that describe what's really going on at all.
exactly.
So, and I feel, comfortable alienating anybody who's gonna try to tell me that I have to send my child to a school
Yeah.
program that has trans teachers. Anyway,
Yes. That's a great example. I wanna hear more specific examples like this. So going through each of your sovereignty pillars, right, and we were talking about physical, it would be great to hear how you implement that type of sovereignty in your day-to-day, especially in motherhood.
yes. Okay. So physically, we choose not to do too much medical stuff, but we have chosen to engage a little bit. And there are certain things we use medical things for. Most of my children are unvaxxed, so they're very healthy.
Yeah,
But
same.
yeah. But basically, so when I was pregnant with both Torsten and Kalina, because I had lived through the experience I described, I chose to start my pregnancies in the system and get advanced genetics for each of them because I didn't want to go forward. I mean, I figured if it made me that sick the first time, I would know, but I didn't want to move forward any farther than I had to into a pregnancy that was going to be, um, a difficulty in the end. So I was like, I want to know what the genetic circumstances of these kids. And after that, I got sort of like the advanced testing that I then had automatic access to because knowing that I'm a carrier for this disease. After that, I would then go with a midwife and kind of be on the natural end. But that was something that was kind of important to me because I knew that that was how I felt about that issue. And medically with my kids, like, for example, we haven't really done dentistry with them yet, but we do for my older kid and soon for my younger kid, we do, myofunctional therapy it's actually a retired dentist who runs this clinic, but it's like a breathing airway thing that gives you, like, a little retainer, and it just basically helps your facial bones grow by encouraging the right muscle activity.
Yep. I
So,
love
like
myotherapy.
me too.
Mm.
Me too. It's made a huge difference actually already in his dental development and everything. But so like I think engaging where you exactly want to and where you don't and kind of weighing that and having a good reason why, those are all really wise steps. Yeah, so physical, emotional, intellectual and spiritual. Um Intellectual sovereignty is challenging your assumptions and exposing yourself to opposing arguments. And I mean, well, think about, like, what they used to tell journalists. It was like, "If your mother says she loves you, check it out." It's like, you should wonder. Think about how science is supposed to work. Like,
Yeah.
we should be wondering, we should be curious, and it doesn't mean you have to give up your values. It actually just means that you have to be sure of what you're doing and what you're
Check your
learning.
biases. You've actually
Yeah.
helped me with this a great deal. And, sometimes I've come
Oh,
at you
good.
and I said, like, I don't know if I'm ready to discuss this right now, but like, let's leave the door open. And I need to let it simmer a little bit. I need to sit with it like, is this thing possible? Like, do I want to explore this further? And it is important to check your biases. We all have
Yeah.
them, being self-aware enough to know. And, it's also okay if like maybe you're not ready to go down a certain path or you are going to accept something at face value, but you're open to changing your mind later. I think the
Totally.
idea is just openness, and it takes a lot of self-awareness. And just not jumping to being defensive. So you've helped me with this a lot, which I really respect. And also for me, my journey to this is more politically, but I have swung on the pendulum. No, I never swung like ever far right. Like, don't get me wrong, but I used to be like uber socialist liberal mindset in my
Mhm.
20s
Me too.
to then like conservative,
Yeah.
never ultra conservative, but definitely conservative. And now, if I had to, the problem is they make you choose between two in this country. In other countries, there's like seven different parties. If I had to choose, of course, I'm going to lean more conservatively than liberally,
Yeah.
obviously, with my values. But the truth is, no, like I do think that Fox News is just as bad as CNN in a different way.
Mhm.
And I do think they're both distracting us from other more important issues, of course. But if I had to
They
choose, yeah,
don't.
I'm going to watch Fox. It doesn't mean I think they're perfect, and I think they're missing, they're leaving a lot out. Just knowing that though, as you're watching the news,
Mhm.
understanding the biases, that's the key thing, you know?
I completely agree. I mean, yeah, you have to think of Debate Club. If you can't make the other side's argument, they're gonna win. They have weapons you don't know. So,
Yes.
definitely, I love that, and I have had the same political journey I think that you have. I was essentially a professional feminist for, like, 15 years, like, it's kind of embarrassing now when I think about that, but, like, I was working at nonprofits that were not putting the power in the hands of the people either, and I was trying to woo them away from being on benefits and having gray market businesses and small businesses to, like, accepting $9 an hour gas station jobs. And I was like they were like, "We need a better brochure, Celanie." And I was like, "No, we need a better value offering. These people are doing great. They're doing great, and they're smart enough to know that they don't need this program." Like, yeah, anyway, so just questioning what things are called. Intellectually, there's a big component of analyzing language and being like, "How is this being sold to me versus what it really is?" Right?
Hmm.
Read Orwell, go back and study all that and apply it to your language and your propaganda and go, "Is this the truth for me of what is really being discussed? Are the power dynamics really what I'm kind of being told?" Recognizing power dynamics gets you kind of beneath the language pretty quickly. Um, but yeah, no, you're right about the biases thing. It's actually we are designed to be subjective beings, and you're allowed to keep your biases if you can just identify them and admit them and
Sure.
be like, "Well, I'm gonna try to approach it like this because that's really what I care about." But at the end of the day, I don't think you have to give up your values to be more objective. I think you just have to mm, exercise them a little bit, you know?
Yes.
So that's physical and intellectual. Emotional, it's really important to think about your relationships and kind of if you're not happy, first of all, I would say to maidens, especially, I had this problem, but like you can tell that you are not emotionally sovereign when you're not happy alone. Like
Yeah.
when you don't feel comfortable alone, when you're like, this isn't real unless I tell someone and I like emotionally give that to them somehow. That's like a crutch in a way as a younger person. That was like a crutch for me. And then, um, you're not emotionally sovereign when other people can, like, tr trigger you enough that they can make you do something you don't really wanna do.
Yep.
A lot of people's parents kind of can still do. Um, your goal, I think, in this part of your life, in your emotional sovereignty journey, your goal is to meet the version of yourself that can handle anything, and some people do that by having the most intense experiences, and other people just, figure out a way to contact that part of themselves by being really real with themselves, taking themselves apart from sensory stimulation and spending some time with some things and just being like, how do I really deeply feel about this? And examining your relationships that way. Um, a way that emotional and physical sovereignty interact is that you can actually, and we're gonna eventually do like a workshop that offers a meditation about this that I wrote and conducted before. But you can ask yourself how you physically feel about certain things to determine your emotional conclusions about them, and whether you wanna make a certain decision, you, like, you can imagine the experience, imagine it coming into your physical sphere, its field merging with yours, and now this is your truth in your life. Do you like that feeling? And it's really as simple as that, like, you can trust your body, you can always trust your body, and, you should trust it more because these are, like, kind of stacked. I guess it's in a way, it's like the chakras or something. These are kind of stacked, and if you drill down to the bottom, you can trust what you find there in yourself. You can really trust it, you can bank on it being true for you later, even if the facts of it aren't true. The decision and the feeling, if you trust yourself, you're not gonna, like, you're gonna live a life with a lot fewer regrets because regret comes from being pulled in a direction you didn't belong going in, I guess.
Yes.
So, and so for me, the spiritual experience, which I kind of already discussed, was like weighing what I think about what God is versus the tales that people have told me about God. And it's like, if you're really sovereign in a religious area of your life, it's a self-directed journey where the ideas of divinity that you have help you rise further into your higher self and empower you. They don't like keep you small. You don't look at God as a way of avoiding determining either your own sense of existential purpose and the meaning of your life or yourself, or your sense of morality, your ethical responsibility in any given situation. And so God should never be like the substitute for you doing that work for yourself. Um, I don't think that God should ever be somebody who like makes you feel shame about something that you know is true.
Mhm.
God can like maybe govern our wants and needs in a way, but like I don't think that God should be a source of shame. I think that's not God.
Valid.
Um, So and I think it's actually really important too, just as with your intellectual conclusions and your physical routines or whatever, is to test your faith in a way where you're like, would I still live my life the same way if there was no God because these things are important to me? Am I doing any of this to go to heaven or be good or be what someone thinks of as a fancy, good Christian Jew, whatever? Or am I like doing it because in my heart of hearts and in my body and my bones, this is what I want to do with my life? Um, I think those should work, and if they don't, I think more questions are required, you know?
Totally
Um,
agree.
yeah. Okay, so political sovereignty, you are able to understand and drill down to the power dynamics in any given equation of public life. You can't be talked out of your understanding using rhetoric or propaganda. You're aware of the power dynamics happening around you. Those are more important to you than the emotional cues and the rhetoric or the good arguments. Like it's there's a point in every like anti-vax mother's journey where she's like, I don't give a shit about how good your argument is because
Yeah.
I know. And I actually at Children's Health Defense there was a local rally here in Pittsburgh where I gave a speech about that moment and that process of being like, uh, there's a type of knowing that no authority can give you. It actually is yours, and that should always come first. The knowing should come first. And politically, you can do that too. Like usually, it amounts to power dynamics and the question of who really wants what they want and why. And that's so it's analyzing that in the same way that you would your relationships, and just going like, what systems are active here, and never really individuals are not gonna be the answer to who's behind the curtain. It's never gonna be like the
Exactly.
Jews or like somebody like that. It's never gonna be that.
Right.
It's gonna be, a combination of wealth and power, maybe even some crazy wacky magic conspiracy theories that I personally like to dabble in, but it's not gonna be your neighbor. It's not gonna be the people of the synagogue down the street. It's not gonna be, um the other party as some kind of boogeyman for like who is causing all the problems in America. Like it's not going to be like that. It's the real answer is the people who are really doing it have a million masks like that they throw up as human shields to confuse you. And if you understand the power dynamic, I've also come to this too. I don't even need to know who they is. I don't even
Yeah.
care because I can tell what they are doing to me and I can find ways to have it not done. And that's what I care about. And beyond that, I'm gonna be like, with my kids, right?
You're so funny. What are one of the ways you do to have it not done to you?
I mean, I refuse when people try to get me to read mainstream news, even though I sometimes do, because I'm
It's
just like,
funny, right?
you want me to it is kind of funny. Like, you want me to, like, read Mother Jones with, like, a really straight face on and, like, really read everything in there. I mean, at this point and by the way, I have a master's in journalism and was a newspaper journalist for a long time and wrote a little bit for magazines too.
Or
Like
like the Associated Press or the New York
yeah.
Times is a joke. I'm like, "No,
Yeah, yeah.
no."
So, I really, as a journalist, I even encountered some of this actually in my career, is that, like, there are things you're not allowed to write about. There are questions you're not allowed to ask. There are ways you don't do things. And when you're asking to verify something, there's an official source and what they tell you is the truth. And pretty quickly that becomes too small for most thinking people. But like, there's only so much you can kind of do about that in that line of work, unless you're really working for yourself. And I greatly admire a lot of independent journalists that way. But anyway, okay. And finally, cultural sovereignty, which is you no longer need approval from the other people in your life to adopt the life ways that suit you.
I wanna
You
pause here real quick.
Oh, yeah, please.
This type of sovereignty, cultural sovereignty, this is exactly what I think every single mom's off the record listener should aspire to if she hasn't already accomplished this, because this is at the root of being able to live confidently in your decisions around vaccines, alternative medical decisions, homeschool. These are the common themes I always hear about from listeners and followers on Instagram. Like, how can I tell so and so my family about this decision, or how can I side skirt this discussion? And it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about cultural sovereignty.
Man, I know exactly the conversation you're talking about. We've, like, worked on a workshop about it together in the past, and it's
Yes.
a lot of drag in your life getting where you wanna go, and it's like these people are all, like a little kid, like, latched onto your leg, their body weight is keeping you back, right? And it's, like,
Yeah.
so complicated how who you surround you with and yourself with and why, and what larger cultural ideas you expose yourself to and why, and how, like, much you're able to cultivate comfort with alternative ideas or decisions in the face of, like, mainstream groupthink? Are you willing to, like, take people like that out of your life? Are there ones you can't take out of your life? Could you instead, like, bring a lot of new people into your life who really are, like, values-oriented connections for you? And, I said this before, I'll say it again, that, like, other moms are the key. Like, you need other moms to help you succeed. If life feels hard, other moms are what you need. Like,
Yeah.
it's an incredible force multiplier to have friends and community members and mentors and people who, like, share your values that can lead you in the ways that you wanna go. And, so you have to really get brave to find those people though, because it's like you have to, like, poke yourself out of the foxhole and, like, wave your freak flag a little bit. And a lot of people are very afraid to do that because they're like, "This will brand me." And it's like, don't you wanna be branded with your own true self? Don't you want me to be the banner that you wear? Like,
Yeah.
so it takes some, like, paradigm shifting, and it takes sometimes giving some things up of, like, things that are a little bit, convenience oriented, let's say. Like, you might not have to do this in every public situation. Maybe if you are, you know, using a little school where some of the people agree with you and some don't about something, maybe you don't wanna be that mom, but maybe you do. Sometimes being a mother is being willing to be that person for your child. And, so I would just say that you can build your own cultural world, and you can bring new ideas into it, you can bring new people into it. You can trust the people in your life with their ability to respect your boundaries and their ability to process, and letting them digest that be their problem. And you can, like, uh, you can cultivate it like a garden all around you. You can make a world that makes sense to you, and that's really what you should do. And it's not an echo chamber, it's an authentic, growing, living process that's yours, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I like to, whenever I'm scared to do something, I like to just do a gut check with myself and say, like, what's the absolute worst thing or most embarrassing thing that could happen from this? So I
I
show
love
my
that.
true
Yes.
colors, right? Okay, so the worst thing is this person that I like that I'm trying to form a friendship with might just not want to be my friend. Okay, big deal. I mean, the stakes are so low. Like, we just maybe met, there's other friends out there. Or Like, would there be something even worse? Like, would they try to embarrass me? And, like, most people are not that insane. They're just gonna move on. Like, it
Yeah.
just might not work out. They're just gonna move on. Is that so terrible? You know, that feeling of rejection? It's really not. It is good to get used to it, and it does make you more resilient. So there's that. And also, like, I like to think, well, all right, so I'm afraid of having this debate or this conversation or showing my true colors. What can make me more confident? Thinking about what my life might be like if I did the alternative instead. Like,
Yes.
and that's way scarier. So if someone's like, "Oh, I can't imagine being with my kids all day every day," I think to myself, like, "I can't imagine sending them away from 9 to 5
Yeah.
every day," you know, and that makes me more bold and confident in the fact that, no, I am with them, and, like, this is rewarding and fulfilling work, like, it brings you back to your why. When
Yes.
people start to draw you away, then I'm like, "Oh, no, 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 this is why I do what I do, and I'm
Yes.
really happy about it."
1,000%. I love that. You're so right. Yeah, I think every, homeschooling mom definitely has to go through that. Every anti-vax mom has to go through that, making these crazy decisions, but then being like, what would be the alternative and what might that look like? And sometimes in those cases, especially with it involving medical stuff, the alternative can be pretty like you can meet people and go face to face with people, or you can even watch videos. Children's Health Defense has a lot of videos of people who you can see face to face what the alternative, could be. Actually, I love the method that you describe and how I like to do it. If it's a really big thing, I don't do this very often, but if it's a really big thing, like I did this when I wanted to marry my husband, spend one day living completely, completely, completely in the reality of one choice, and that is your life, and that's gonna be your from now on, that's what you're gonna do. And then the next day, do the opposite. And usually what I'd like to do is do the yes one first and do the no one second. And, or the one that you're, like, sort of leaning towards first maybe, or the additive one first and the subtractive one second. And the second day of thinking about whether I should marry him was so horrible that I didn't even make it the whole day. I was about lunchtime, and I was like, "You know what? I need to marry this man." And, like, that's how you'll
That's so
know.
sweet.
Yeah, it works, man. It works.
And we both have Swedish husbands.
Oh, that's right, we do. You're right. That's hilarious. Only yours is, like, really Swedish from Sweden, and mine is Swedish American, but they're both, I guess, very organized, and they approach
Yes.
things a certain way.
It's something in their DNA.
Yeah, something in the DNA.
That's so cute. So,
Yeah.
okay, this was so comprehensive, and I feel like this was such a necessary conversation, again, because we need to first define what sovereignty is if we're
Mhm.
even going to strive to be more sovereign, and then
Yeah.
understanding the why, like what is the point of being sovereign, right? So, I want to put a pin in it now. And for listeners out there, if you are not in the Moms Off the Record private community where Selene is also sharing her wisdom, you need to get on over here because these are the types of very in depth, nuanced conversations we like to have. And once you're in the community, you will also have access to Selene's first workshop she did, which was all about homeschooling. So if you're interested in homeschooling, you want to get started, you'll have access to that. Um, and
Actually, wait, the first
yeah.
one, no, it was a different one. It was
Oh, no, it
about,
wasn't homeschooling. That was
how
your
to
second one.
manage the relationships in your life vis-a-vis
Yes.
natural health choices and boundaries and sort of
Thank
information
you.
flow about that stuff,
Yes,
which was
yes,
useful
yes.
too.
That is yes, that is absolutely right because you've done 2 workshops. So, what I'd like to do this time is just gauge, an interest in exploring the topic of sovereignty a little bit deeper because Selene has a really wonderful meditation that she can guide you all through. So, what I'm going to do, like, once this recording goes live and, I share a little clip to Instagram, is I'll have a way for you to comment with something and then we can put you on a wait list to see if you would like to be a part of a guided meditation by Selene. And Selene, do you want to talk about anything that you have in the works? Because I know that you're talking about doing some of your own creative initiatives as well, or is it a little bit too early stage still?
Thank you so much. It is a little bit too early, but I think we're going to pilot some of it through Moms Off the Record. This
Yes.
conversation in an expanded form with some resources, I think, is going to be a workshop in there, and we might have a
Yes.
couple of breakout little resources that we might market individually too. But a
Yes.
lot of the themes that I touched on today, I'm going to definitely be doing some stuff about in the future. The healing, somatic trauma, and also ritual and emotional journeying away from BDSM and sort of neurological damage in that way, and toward a more sovereign sexuality is actually something that I've been working on for over a year with Kelsey Hitchcock. I'd like to eventually make that its own thing.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, yeah, a lot of the same stuff, and I'd love to be able to, um, give people a little download that is a handful of different techniques that I like to use, just like the one where you physically take it on and then you put it away. But I think for that, you're gonna have to join Moms Off the Record. I'd love to see you there.
That's right. Yes, we would love to see you there. And Saloni, thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey and all about sovereignty. I'm always learning from you, and you're such an inspiration.
Likewise, my pleasure. Thank you for this amazing conversation, and I look forward to more in the future.
Yes. Stay tuned. Bye,
Stay tuned.
everyone.